Hello and welcome to In Depth. I'm Tina Jha. The Antarctic region has registered its highest ever temperature on record as mercury soared over 20 degrees Celsius earlier this week. Researchers logged 20.75 degrees Celsius on an island off the coast of the continent on the 9th of February, a record high temperature never seen before in the Antarctic region. The latest reading follows another temperature record logged on the 6th of February, when an Argentinian research station at Esperanza had measured 18.3 degrees Celsius, the highest reading on mainland Antarctica. The previous record for the entire Antarctic region, which includes the continent, the islands and the ocean that are in the Antarctic climatic zone, was 19.8 degrees Celsius, logged way back in January 1982. Although the new temperature reading was not part of a wider study, scientists warn it is enough to indicate how fast Antarctica is warming. On this edition of In Depth, we look at the impact of global warming in the Antarctic region, the causes and consequences of melting Antarctic ice, and also global efforts that are being undertaken to reduce and stop global warming. A research base in the Antarctic region has recorded the hottest temperature ever for the continent amid rising concern about global warming that has caused an increase in the melting of ice sheets around the South Pole. This, of course, has also raised serious concern over the situation in Antarctica. The Antarctic has registered a temperature of more than 20 degrees centigrade or 68 degrees Fahrenheit for the first time on record. This has prompted fears of climate instability at the world's greatest repository of ice. The 20.75 degrees Celsius logged by a research base in the Antarctic is the hottest temperature ever for the continent. It was recorded by Brazilian scientists at Soared Island on 9th of February this year, and is almost a full degree higher than the previous record of 19.8 degrees Celsius taken on Sinai Island in January 1982. Soared Island is part of a chain off the peninsula that curves out from the northern tip of Antarctica.
What we know is of great concern. The Antarctic Peninsula, so where we saw this temperature record yesterday, it's the northwest tip near South America. It's among the fastest warming regions of the planet. We hear a lot about the Arctic, but this particular part of the Antarctic Peninsula is warming very quickly. Over the past 50 years, it's warmed almost 3 degrees Celsius.
I think it's important that we remind ourselves when we report on these record events that we look at the bigger picture and we look at the trends over time. Because things will go up and things will go down. But what worries me is the long-term average trends of increasing temperatures that we see around the world.
The temperature in the southern Shetland was about 20 degrees, which they claim to be 1 degree above what was known earlier. And that's what is concerning them and concerning everybody else. But they have just put a caveat that it needs to be, verified, or it needs to be actually ratified by the World Meteorological Organization. Was it?
The news came a week after Argentina's National Meteorological Service recorded the hottest day on record for Argentine Antarctica. 18.3 degrees Celsius at midday at the Esperanza base, located near the tip of the Antarctic Peninsula. With Antarctica suffering the worst impact of the climate crisis, the World Meteorological Organization has confirmed that the Antarctic Peninsula is one of the fastest warming areas in the world, with temperatures rising by almost 3 degrees Celsius over the last 50 years, and annual ice loss increasing at least sixfold between 1979 and 2017. Last month, the United Nations underscored that the past decade has been the hottest on record, with 2019 being the second hottest year ever after 2016.
The amount of ice lost annually from the Antarctic ice sheet increased at least sixfold between 1979 and 2017. most of the ice loss takes place from the melting of the ice shelves from below. So you get the warm water, which is actually just melting the ice sheets from below. Another fact, and I'll share the briefing notes with you, some 87% of glaciers along the west coast of the Antarctic Peninsula have retreated in the last 50 years, with most of these showing an accelerated retreat in the past 12 years.
While temperatures in eastern and central Antarctica are relatively stable, there are growing concerns about West Antarctica. Accelerating melt-off from glaciers and ice sheets is driving the increase in sea level, threatening coastal megacities and small island nations. According to satellite images from the European Space Agency, a large iceberg has broken off from Pine Island Glacier on the edge of Antarctica. The iceberg, 300 square kilometers in size, quickly shattered into pieces after it split from the glacier. Further, the population of chinstrap penguins fell by up to 77% in some Antarctic colonies in the last 50 years, with an average depopulation of around 60%. The chinstrap penguin is named after the narrow black band under its head. It inhabits the islands and shores of the southern Pacific and Antarctic oceans.
This is a rapidly changing environment here. And so what does that mean? Well, we found, at least if penguins are any indication, and we think they are, we think they're great bioindicators, that something's happening to the fundamental building blocks of the food chain here. That perhaps it's with the primary productivity, the phytoplankton or zooplankton, or perhaps it's just with the krill themselves. But we've got less food abundance that's driving these populations down lower and lower over time.
They've been growing rapidly over the past few days. The European Union has a satellite called Sentinel that's been measuring and monitoring these, and there are pretty dramatic images. Why does it matter? It matters a lot because of sea level rise. There's two big glaciers. There's the Pine Island Glacier and the Thwaites Glacier. Once the melting from these glaciers, means we're in big trouble when it comes to sea level rise.
Antarctica is a very, very critical area. Not only have they already observed and suggested that penguin population is alarmingly declining, which means that the habitat which is needed for such animals to live, whether it is Antarctic penguins in Antarctica or polar bears on the pole. So the habitats of such animals which are which are adapted to such conditions, so their extinction is equally kind of an alarming news if their habitats go.
Antarctica encompasses land, islands and oceans south of 60 degrees latitude. This region stores about 70% of the world's fresh water in the form of snow and ice. The average annual temperature ranges from about -10 degrees Celsius on the Antarctic coast to -60 degrees Celsius at the highest points of the interior. Its immense ice sheet is up to 4.8 kilometers thick and contains 90% of the world's fresh water, enough to raise sea level by around 60 meters were it all to melt. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV. The current rise in temperatures in Antarctica are forcing glaciers to melt at a very, very fast pace. With glaciers being the biggest source of fresh water available in the world, the concern now is the rate at which melting ice is pouring down into the sea. This intense melting is producing a big ripple effect like extreme flooding and biodiversity loss, and scientists have warned that the world is losing its ice quite fast.
Ice acts like a protective cover over the earth and our oceans. It also reflects excess heat back into the space and keeps the planet cooler. In theory, the Arctic is colder than the equator because more heat from sun is bounced off by the ice back into space. Glaciers can range from ice several hundreds to several thousand years old and provide a scientific record of how climate has changed over time. It also tells us the extent to which the planet is rapidly warming. Rapid glacial melt in Antarctica and Greenland influences ocean currents. Massive amounts of very cold glacial melt water entering warmer oceans water slows down ocean currents. This intense melting of glaciers is producing a big ripple effect like extreme flooding and biodiversity loss.
Glacier melting, whether it is Antarctica or any other glaciers melting, is that there will be more water now, which will be converted from ice, which will be released and which will get into the ocean, seas. And one of the immediate impacts that is likely to happen is that we are likely to get, sea level rise. So the water level in the sea would go up, which would mean that a number of areas which are low-lying areas, that means where the difference between the seashore and the mainland is not much, so they can get submerged. So human societies would lose a lot of land which they are managing, whether it is agriculture, whether it is industry, whether it's for any kind of activity that humans do. So that will get impacted.
Since the early 1900s, many glaciers around the world have been rapidly melting. Human activity is at the root of this phenomena. Specifically, since the Industrial Revolution, carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gas emissions have raised temperatures even higher in the poles. Scientists project that if emissions continue to rise unchecked, the Arctic could be ice-free in the summers by year 2040. The main causes of melting ice glaciers are burning of fossil fuels that have resulted in the buildup of greenhouse gases, thus influencing the warming trend because they trap heat in the atmosphere. Oil and gas drilling that emits methane, which is the main constituent of natural gas. Methane is more damaging to the environment than carbon dioxide, locking in heat more efficiently and escalating global warming. Deforestation has a lot of negative effects, like a rise in sea levels. And lastly, ice-breaking ships that head to the north in the Arctic Ocean during summer, breaking through the ice at the sea. The broken ice has lesser ability to reflect back sun rays, which means that water takes in more heat. This results in hotter water and consequently more ice melting. Extreme flooding resulting in an abrupt rise in water input to other water bodies like rivers, lakes and seas. Melting glaciers are causing a loss of biodiversity and animals losing homes. Rising water temperatures and water levels affect fish and aquatic plants, which in turn affects birds that rely on them. Coral reefs that need sunlight for photosynthesis are also affected when water levels increase and block sunlight from reaching them. Fish species that depend on corals for food are killed due to the loss of their food. Also, a lot of chemical pollutants and pesticides that become airborne got deposited in chilly places with glaciers. The rapid melting of glaciers is now discharging them back into water bodies. The economic cost of melting ice glaciers affect the whole world. Each continent is experiencing flooding and other glacier-related disasters that require huge intervention, financial capital to mitigate. Reducing glaciers is also causing a scarcity of fresh water that is only worsening with rising population. Lastly, the melting glaciers is accelerating global warming, since the Earth is not able to deflect as much heat, thereby increasing water levels across the oceans and rivers. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
We humans have caused major changes to climate already, setting in motion more changes that will reveal themselves maybe after years. In fact, even if we stopped emitting greenhouse gases right now, global warming would continue to happen for at least several more decades, if not centuries. That's because it takes a while for the planet to respond, and because carbon dioxide lingers in the atmosphere for hundreds of years. That is why it may be important to revisit global commitments over climate change before it is too late for us.
glaciers in Antarctica and Himalayas melting, bushfires raging across lakhs of acres in Australia, the lungs of the earth, Amazon forests on fire, unusual weather patterns seen across the world. Over the past decade or two, the frequency of these phenomena has increased. There is a direct link between these changes and climate change, and that's why the world has come together and set targets to fight climate change before it's too late. But are we doing enough? Is what we have planned for the future enough to halt an apocalypse? A United Nations report from November last year paints a bleak picture. It says that the commitments countries pledged to limit the climate crisis are not enough to stave off record high temperatures, and delaying change any further will make it impossible to reach desired temperature goals. The United Nations Environment Programme 2019 Emissions Gap Report says that the current committed measures will not keep global temperature increases within the 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius range. At the current rate of emissions, the world's temperature could rise 3.2 degrees Celsius by 2100. So the UNEP suggests some extreme changes. To get Earth back on track to the 1.5 degree goal, countries must now multiply their commitment level 5 times the current rates outlined in the Paris Accords. This means that global greenhouse gas emissions must fall at least 7.6% every year to remove 32 gigatons of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Incremental change is no longer enough to stall off the potentially devastating effects of a changing climate. What is needed now is rapid and transformational action. 2019's UN Climate Action Summit saw some commitment from countries to advance their carbon neutrality efforts. With most G20 nations absent from the events at the summit, the 78% global greenhouse gas emissions they are responsible for is a big concern. Just 5 of 20 member countries have set a date to reach net zero emissions. Of those, only 2 have created legislation to enforce those goals. Countries like the US, that leads G20 nations in per capita emissions, has already backed out of efforts against climate change. When it completes the withdrawal process this year, the US will be the only country in the world to not have signed on to the Paris Climate Accords. 2020 is a critical year for climate change. Countries will meet to renegotiate their commitments at the UN Climate Change Conference in Glasgow in November 2020, but they will have to take extensive action to avert a future crisis.
One of the good things that happened was that our Prime Minister's that idea on Global Solar Alliance, huge alliance. Now, if we consciously take such decisions as to limit the greenhouse gas emissions on Earth, then there is hope. But it needs tremendous political will. But America doesn't have that kind of will. The American leadership possibly doesn't, is not on board at all. So they want to dig more and more coal. They want to go. So they feel that if you have to make America great again, so you have to go back to doing what you have been doing all these years.
There are some essential changes that are needed to chip away at emissions. These include establishing vehicle emission standards and investing in public transportation that runs on electricity. Pricing carbon, meaning making major polluters pay for their emissions, provides an incentive for major emitters to reduce their output. Phasing out coal power plants will also help. With renewable energy technology becoming increasingly affordable, solar power and wind turbines are needed to phase out coal plants. These changes on a global scale will not be cheap. Climate policies consistent with the 1.5 degree goal could cost up to $3.6 trillion per year globally, but the cost likely outweighs the consequences of inaction. If global temperatures rise more than 1.5 degrees Celsius, humankind will have to make adaptations that will make a serious dent on the world's economy and reduce food security and biodiversity. and delaying action any further will need nations to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere at a magnitude that current technology and resources cannot achieve. So while immediate action is needed to save the Earth, it is not too late to do something about it either. Responding to climate change needs a two-tier approach: mitigation, that is reducing the flow of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, and adaptation, essentially meaning learning to live with and adapt to the climate change that has already been set in motion. Climate change being a truly global, complex problem with economic, social, political, and moral ramifications, the solution requires both a globally coordinated response and local efforts on the city and regional level. It's now up to us what world we leave behind for the future generations. With inputs from Vipul Agarwal, Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
It was in the year 1975 that economist Dr. William Nordhaus saw the warming planet as a threat to the global economy. He had said an increase in the global average temperature of 2 degrees Celsius caused by man-made carbon dioxide would change our climate in ways not seen in the last several 100,000 years. And over the decades, the world has witnessed rapid changes resulting from global warming. In our next report, let's analyze the impact of increasing temperatures on our environment.
Our planet is experiencing increasing temperatures. According to a temperature analysis conducted by scientists at NASA's Goddard Institute of Space Studies, the average global temperature on Earth has increased by about 0.8 degrees Celsius or 1.4 degrees Fahrenheit since 1880, the earliest year for which reliable instrumental records are available worldwide. Two-thirds of the warming has occurred since 1975 at a rate of roughly 0.15 to 0.20 degrees Celsius per decade. Scientists believe the increased volumes of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases released by the burning of fossil fuels, land clearing, agriculture and other human activities are the primary sources of the global warming that has occurred over the past 50 years. And by the year 2100, it is predicted that average global temperatures could increase between 1.4 and 5.8 degrees Celsius. The temperature rise may appear small in number, but it has brought about vast changes in the world's climate. Even the 1 degree global change is significant because it takes a vast amount of heat to warm all the oceans, atmosphere and land by that much. In the past, a 1 to 2 degree drop was all it took to plunge the Earth into the Little Ice Age.
The climate change refers to this phenomena which scientists have argued, observed that over a long period of time, Earth is now passing through a warming period. Okay, and because of that warming period, a number of subsequent changes have happened on Earth.
Global climate change has already brought about immediate observable effects on the planet. Glaciers have shrunk, ice is melting worldwide, especially at the North and South poles. This includes mountain glaciers, ice sheets covering Antarctica and Greenland, and the Arctic sea ice. For example, in Montana's Glacier National Park, the number of glaciers has declined to fewer than 30 from more than 150 in 1910. The melting ice contributes to rise in sea levels as well. Scientists say global sea levels are rising 0.13 inches or 3.2 millimeters every year. The rise has been rapid in recent years and has threatened low-lying islands and coastal cities. Rising temperatures are affecting wildlife and their habitats. Melting glaciers and vanishing ice has made survival of certain species difficult, pushing them towards extinction. The world is witnessing more frequent and extreme weather events like bushfires, cyclones, droughts and floods. Scientists say oceans have absorbed most of the extra heat and carbon dioxide more than the air, making the seas both warmer and more acidic. Warming waters are bleaching coral reefs and driving stronger storms. Rising ocean acidity threatens shellfish, including the tiny crustaceans without which marine food chains would collapse. Besides, climate change is a major threat to agriculture. Where, how, and when we grow food is vitally connected to our climate's normal patterns. Farms are more likely to face attacks from weeds, diseases, and pests which affect yield. Further, a warmer atmosphere increases the formation of ground-level ozone, also known as smog, in polluted regions. 2015 was the first year in which the global annual average surface temperature reached 1 degree Celsius above the pre-industrial level. Each year since then, the global average has hovered close to or above the 1 degree Celsius mark. The decade from 2014 to 2023 has been predicted to be the warmest in more than 150 years of record keeping. Scientists see it as a critical threshold for climate change.
A host of things, including human health, agriculture, which have been impacted because of the climate change, which includes both temperature change and also the precipitation, that means rainfall or snowfall and things like that.
The consequences will be more drastic and widespread if the world gets warmer by 2 degrees Celsius. Sea levels could rise between 10 and 32 inches or higher by the end of the century. Hurricanes and other storms are likely to become stronger. Floods and droughts will become more common. The world faces the risk of decades-long mega droughts by 2100. Less fresh water will be available since glaciers store about 3/4 of the world's fresh water. Vector-borne diseases will spread to vast areas and there could be a resurgence of the Zika virus. Ecosystems will continue to change. Some species may venture farther north, while some others who are unable to adapt could become extinct. To prevent these effects, the United Nations signed the Paris Agreement in 2016, an international treaty designed to keep the average global temperature well below 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. Until greenhouse gas emissions are reduced, the world will continue to witness an upward trend in global average temperatures. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
So that's it from us on the show today. You can also watch it online on YouTube and Twitter, and you can also get back to us with your feedback and suggestions. Thank you for your time.